Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving meaningful comments. Wishing everyone good health and happiness. Early in the morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thin mist, I woke up and stepped into the garden. The fresh, cool air made me feel refreshed. I began my daily tasks, bending down to pull out the clumps of grass growing densely under the grapefruit tree. The soil beneath my feet was soft, and the morning dew seeping through my sandals gave me a sense of closeness to nature. While I was diligently working, I heard the sound of a car approaching from afar. Moments later, James appeared with his familiar look, elegant yet simple. He stepped out of the car and walked toward me with a bright smile on his face. "Take a break," he said in his warm, deep voice. I looked up at him, feeling an unusual sense of joy. Without hesitation, James headed straight into the garden, his eyes carefully observing the grapefruit trees laden with fruit. He selected a large, plump grapefruit and skillfully picked it with his hands. Then he brought it over to where I was resting and used a small knife to carefully cut it open. The sweet aroma of the grapefruit segments filled the air, making me feel delighted. We ate the grapefruit together while chatting. He shared stories about his travels and interesting everyday experiences he had encountered. I listened quietly, occasionally smiling in response. His stories not only made me feel closer to him but also helped me forget the fatigue of my morning work. After a while, he stood up and said he would go buy some water for me. I watched his figure fade away on the small path leading out of the garden, feeling a slight pang of wistfulness. The space returned to its peaceful quietness, with only the chirping of birds somewhere high in the trees. When he returned, he brought back a cold bottle of water and handed it to me with a sincere smile. "Drink some water to ease your fatigue," he said before naturally rolling up his sleeves to help me till the soil in the garden. Watching James work so diligently stirred something in me. The steady rhythm of his strong strokes echoed amidst the tranquil morning atmosphere. I stood by and watched him work, feeling deeply grateful for his enthusiasm. The soil in the garden was quite hard, but he didn't complain and kept digging with firm and careful movements. When I noticed he was starting to tire, I stepped in to take over and continue the unfinished task. Just then, his phone rang, breaking the garden's silence. He answered it and then turned to tell me that something urgent had come up and he had to leave immediately. I nodded in agreement but couldn't help feeling regretful as I watched his figure gradually disappear down the familiar path we had walked together that morning. The space felt emptier without James's presence. I continued working in the garden, but my mind lingered on the image of that kind and thoughtful man, from picking a grapefruit to helping me till the soil so earnestly. That morning was truly special, leaving me with unforgettable emotions about a simple yet meaningful day in this familiar little corner of my garden. That afternoon, Mr. Pow went drinking with his friends in the village. After getting drunk, he staggered along the small dirt road and suddenly fell by the roadside. My former mother-in-law happened to pass by and quickly ran over to help him up. Though her figure was small, she tried her best to support him as he stood, scolding him with concern. "Why did you drink so much?" She helped Mr. Pow back home, taking slow steps along the narrow path that wound through lush green fields. When they reached his house, she sat him down on the front doorstep. In his drunken state, Mr. Pow began to mumble incoherently. After a while, he lifted his head to look at her and said, "Go find Diepp for me. I want her to come back and be my wife." My former mother-in-law was momentarily taken aback but said nothing. She sat down beside him, sighed deeply, and gently replied, "All right, I'll go find her for you." Her voice was low and sorrowful but carried a tone of patience and endurance. Then she helped him inside and urged him to sleep so he could sober up. The image of the elderly mother-in-law caring for a drunken man amidst the peaceful countryside moved me deeply. Mr. Pow's words lingered in the quiet air, like a poignant reminder of the tangled and complicated relationships that life brings. Ames went up the hill to inspect the grapefruit harvest. The air on the hill was fresh and cool, with rows of grapefruit trees laden with fruit stretching across the garden, creating a serene and verdant landscape. Dressed in simple attire, James walked among the trees, his eyes attentively observing every detail. The workers were busy picking grapefruits, carefully placing each plump fruit into baskets. James stopped by a large tree, reached out to pick a fruit, and examined its quality. Holding the grapefruit in his hand, he gently turned it to inspect the golden yellow peel glistening under the sunlight. Then, using a knife, he cut the fruit open and tasted a segment to assess its sweetness and distinctive flavor. A satisfied expression briefly appeared on his face as he confirmed that the fruit met the required standards. He continued walking along the rows of trees, occasionally pausing to chat with the workers. He inquired about their progress, methods of sorting the fruit, and reminded them to handle the grapefruits carefully during harvesting to avoid damage. Nearby, mesh bags filled with harvested grapefruits were being gathered into large piles under the trees, ready for transport down the hill. Later, James joined one of the workers to review the quantity and classification of the grapefruits by size and quality. The fruits that met the standards were set aside for distribution, while smaller or subpar ones were designated for alternative processing. He meticulously directed every small detail to ensure that everything proceeded smoothly. As the work neared completion, James stood atop the hill and looked out over the expansive grapefruit orchard. His gaze reflected satisfaction but also a thoughtful contemplation of upcoming plans for this season's harvest. The image of James amidst the lush green orchard not only exuded dedication but also highlighted his sense of responsibility as a manager wholly committed to. As evening fell, the space around the small house grew quiet, with only the chirping of insects echoing in the night. I lit the wood stove, and the flickering flames illuminated the modest kitchen corner. The dry firewood burned brightly, radiating warmth amidst the chilly evening air. While I was busy adding more wood to the fire, I heard footsteps and saw James approaching from afar. He carried a bag of meat and sausages, looking relaxed yet enthusiastic. "Tonight, we're grilling meat," he said cheerfully as he set the bag down and began preparing everything. I stood beside him, watching as he carefully arranged each piece of meat on the grill. The firelight danced across his face, making the scene feel even more intimate. Together, we grilled meat by the crackling fire. James chatted as he worked, sharing stories about his job and life. His warm, deep voice blended with the sound of the fire, creating an unusually cozy atmosphere. I also shared my own experiences working in the garden, simple yet heartfelt tales. The meat and sausages began to turn golden brown, their aroma spreading throughout the small space. James carefully took each piece off the grill and placed them on a plate, adding a bit of dipping sauce to enhance the flavor. We sat together, enjoying the hot meal while continuing our unfinished conversation. Each word made me feel closer to him, a gentle yet profound connection. After finishing our meal, James stood up to clean up. I watched him as he walked out of the small house, his figure gradually disappearing into the dark night. The dim light from the oil lamp in the kitchen corner wasn't enough to keep his image visible for much longer. I stood there, my heart filled with wistful emotions as I recalled the moments we had just shared by the warm firelight. The image of James, from when he brought the meat to when he left, remained etched in my mind as a beautiful memory amidst this simple countryside life. The night had grown completely dark, leaving only dying embers and lingering feelings that I couldn't quite name in my heart.